Welcome to day 2 of Revolve CC. Today, for this morning, we're doing some track talks with some local artists. And I'm happy and proud to introduce our first talk for the day in the Red Room. It's Hannah Cajandig-Taylor, is a poet and writer who recently graduated from Northern's Masters of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. Today, she's going to talk about storytelling. But if you want to read her work, you can purchase her poetry book, Romantic Portrait of a Natural Disaster, which was released last year. If you wish, go chat with her after the talk, and she has copies to deliver locally, or she can get your information and mail you one.
Testing. Whoa. Hello. I talk loud, but this seems like a good thing to have. So I want you to take out a piece of paper, your phone, whatever you prefer to kind of like write on, take notes on, etc. And I've got the cordless because I'm going to walk around a little bit. I don't sit still well. So as you see here, as you're getting out your writing utensils, this is a diner. You have all been into a diner. You've probably not been into this one, but this is a diner from my hometown that is very near and dear to my heart. You don't know anything about this place, but I want you to imagine that you walk into this diner and you're going to order breakfast. When you walk in, first thing I want you to write down is, where do you sit? Do you go up to the bar? Do you maybe find a nice comfortable corner booth? Do you find a nice chair that kind of has a gentle squeak to it if you move around a little bit? You like the table that doesn't look as sticky maybe? You found your spot and you're sitting down at this diner. Obviously, you're here because you probably want something to eat, maybe a cup of coffee. I don't know what you do. I don't know what time of day it is. But what do you order at this diner? You can be as vague or as detailed as you'd like. Now, though I am a writer, my day job is being a bartender and a server, which means that normally I would ask for your order and I would go run it over to a computer and I would make some conclusion about you, to be honest. Waitstaff does that when we get people's food orders. But just out of curiosity, someone, a brave person, tell me where did you go sit when you walked into this diner? Yeah. You went to a booth near a window. Okay. And how did you know there was a booth near a window? Yeah, so you look at this, you're like, yeah, this building looks kind of small. I'm going to go find kind of a nice snug booth, maybe near a window. I assume you like to look outside. Maybe you like the outdoors, perhaps. Perfect, thank you. And someone else, what did you order for breakfast? I saw your hand. Coffee with a very large muffin and a side of scrambled eggs. How do you know this place has scrambled eggs? This is a general question, not just for her, don't worry. You don't, right? But when we look at this diner, we assume this is a place for breakfast. This is a place where, yeah, I could probably go, get some eggs and a muffin. You don't know this place, you've never been there, but you automatically are starting to create a story just based off of what you see here. Your order is itself a story. Just by knowing where she sits, I can learn a little more about her as a person. Just by knowing what she would order for breakfast, I learn a little bit about kind of her habits. Maybe, she likes to indulge in something sweet, but something savory and healthy like eggs also feels like a good option. She probably likes caffeine, she ordered coffee. And when we think about stories, yeah, of course, as I said, I'm a writer. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about writing things. But I also think some of the best stories happen when we don't think about words. So, who here likes to play video games, tabletop games, any kind of escapism game? We all have this instinct in us to kind of play and maybe kind of indulge the childlike sense of curiosity. So this is actually a still that is from one of my favorite games of all time. It is called What Remains of Edith Finch. It is a very strange, surreal game where you walk around and you explore this like larger-than-life house, and there's all these rooms. And I think the thing that compels me most about it is, yeah, you're told these stories, but so much of the story is kind of told through you walking through these rooms and seeing these spaces and almost sharing this like liminal space with these characters and these people. So when we look at this, this is a story. I don't have a paragraph on the screen. This isn't a book, but this is a story. We look at this. Can we learn anything about someone by looking at this? We know it's someone's bedroom because there's a bed. We're going to assume that maybe it's a child named Calvin because it says Fort Calvin on the foot of the bed, but that's not a guaranteed. But we know it's a child's bedroom. We can assume that this child probably likes space, probably has some interest in science, just kind of based off of what we see here. You can't see, I wish I had gotten a different still, but kind of tucked in the corner, like back behind this nightstand in this game, there's a really weird secret passage tucked there. And so when you find that secret passage, you kind of learn, okay, Calvin is into science, Calvin's pretty curious, Calvin somehow made a passage in his room, and I'm not going to figure out how, but it's interesting. And I think that the thing that really compels me the most about this was it made me realize that sometimes when we want to write and tell stories, we get so caught up in the language that we use and having a perfect setting, but the objects that we place in, the colors we use, you know, whether you're writing a story or you're doing your storytelling through a painting or a photograph or designing a building, you're telling a story. At the end of the day, anytime that we make things, we're just telling stories. So something that you might think about and you might ask yourself is, what is a story? If you ask the Oxford English Dictionary, they're going to tell you that a story is going to be some kind of like shared experience. You are telling the events of someone, whether fictional or real, for the sake of entertainment. The for the sake of entertainment part is interesting because how often do we make art and we feel like it's kind of for us, or it's because it feels satisfying or it feels cathartic? It doesn't always feel like it's for entertainment. But at the end of the day, we're telling stories. If you're making a sculpture, you're telling a story behind it. You put this sculpture, the decisions you make when you make it, like the color, the pose of the sculpture, if it's a human or some kind of figure, all of these things come together to tell us something. And most art has a little bit of the artist in it. So just kind of a brief side tangent of when it comes to storytelling and writers and creative putting themselves in. My book that Keith so kindly mentioned, Romantic Portrait of a Natural Disaster, this was my first book. It was a book of poems that I wrote kind of about environmental destruction and climate change, but it's also kind of about how we see destruction of the world and destruction of ourselves having some very common patterns. The idea of something being natural or unnatural, a lot of it was me kind of dealing with anxiety and severe struggles of mental health, and there was something really cathartic about that process in writing it. But I realized that no matter what I wrote, even if it wasn't about me, it was going to have a little bit of me in it. And that's honestly part of what makes our stories really special. And so, whenever we think about what a story is, maybe the first thing we think of is books. And of course, as I said, I'm probably going to go back to books because I'm a writer. If I ask you who wrote Romeo and Juliet, what are you going to say? I'll say, I hope you know who wrote Romeo and Juliet. You're going to say Shakespeare, right? It's an easy answer. This book in the middle, you can't see the author. It's Edward Picard, but that's not the answer. This is one of those choose-your-own-adventure books. Who's ever read one of those books where you open and it's like, if you don't want to fall off the cliff, turn to page 12, and you go, and you make choices, right? So, yeah, this guy wrote the story, but is he telling the story? Maybe, kind of. It's interesting because we crossed into this space where the author is not the only person who's responsible for telling the story. In fact, when we are part of the story and we have some kind of stake in the outcome, it does this thing where we become invested. We kind of know what it's like to live in somebody else's shoes, maybe as much as we can without actually doing it. How many of you here are into tabletop games? Where are my D&D people at? I know there's some of you in here. Obviously, so for those of you who are not familiar, if you play Dungeons & Dragons or any kind of like collaborative storytelling-based game, you have what's called, a campaign. There's a story, but things sometimes kind of go off the rails. You're going to have characters who are the ones driving the story, and the characters are the players themselves. So if I were to ask you, when you're playing a tabletop game, who writes the story? Maybe it's the person behind the campaign, but it's probably the people who are making those choices. They are having an influence on the outcome of the story. That's kind of amazing and it's kind of powerful because it kind of teaches us that, yeah, when we are the creator of a work, we are the teller of the story, the creator of the story, But also by reading these stories or engaging with them in some way, we kind of have a role in the outcome. We have some kind of understanding at the end or something that we would not have had before. And I think that's kind of a really beautiful, amazing, lovely thing. So you might be thinking, I'm not a writer. I'm not going to be doing some kind of collaborative storytelling. Maybe I'm not as interested in this idea of engaging with a story. But at the heart of it, I think the thing that is most important that I want you to get from this entire nerdy side tangent of me talking about video games and tabletop games is that when we're making art, we're telling a story, that's it. It's supposed to be fun. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it feels like we're pulling teeth. But we're just telling a story. And when you tell a story, you are creating a story. If I were to describe standing on this stage to you, and I said that I'm standing in the ethereal lights, basking in the glow and the warmth, it probably sounds like it's a really happy, positive experience, right? It sounds like I'm having a good time up here. But if I say the lights are blinding and there's so many faceless people in the crowd and it's overwhelming, just the words I'm using, that's going to have an impact on how you feel about my story. If I tell you that the grass is lush and ethereal and green, you're going to think it's a really beautiful lawn. If I tell you it's a harrowing jungle, you might not want to step on that lawn. When we are the ones who are telling those stories, we are creating the story. We are creating the perspective. We're kind of making magic, and that's kind of the coolest thing in the whole world. And that's kind of what gets me the most excited, I think, is knowing that when we are creating these stories, we are connecting with people. We are having this really beautiful exchange that really only artists can do. Whether you write or arrange flowers or design buildings, you are creating stories and you're making magic. Now, as I said, sometimes it does feel kind of like you're pulling teeth. You might say, why? John Orpheus gave a lovely talk last night, and he was talking about how he is always inspired. I am in awe of those kind of people because I am not always inspired. I often ask myself where inspiration lives. I came to grad school with 1 publication. I left with 43. I have a book. I've been nominated for 4 or 5 awards. It feels good. It really does. But it doesn't satisfy me, honestly. You can publish and accomplish things all day long, and it's not going to itch your soul in the way that feeling inspired and grateful for your art and your stories will. So we might ask ourselves, where do we find inspiration? How many of you have ever felt stuck on a creative project and you're like, I'm not having fun anymore? It happens. No matter how much we love what we do, more than likely we are going to find some kind of roadblock. Something's going to get in the way. So there's some kind of cheaters you can use because you want to tell these stories, and when you tell a story, all you're doing is creating a story with some inspiration. Kind of hard to do it without the inspiration part. There's a couple things you can do. More than I list here, but these are some strategies that I'm a large fan of and I want to kind of relay to you. The first thing is connecting with others. And of course, collaboration is something that we might think about for this. We might say, okay, I'm a writer. My friend is a talented, I'll use my sister as an example. My sister is an aerial artist. She does aerial yoga, pole, silks, anything that gets her off the ground and gives my mom a heart attack. And so something that we have explored doing is I have written a poem and she's going to create an interpretive dance based off of that poem. Normally when I think of collaboration, I would go to other writers, but sometimes when I'm stuck and I go towards other creatives who are doing things that are wildly different from me, something really beautiful and unexpected comes out. It's a story that I could not tell by myself. Now, connecting with others does come into this idea of collaboration, but it's also really important to emphasize the idea of connect. Being an artist can often feel like a really lonely thing. I know sometimes I get up and I sit at my keyboard or my typewriter or I'm handwriting and it feels like I'm the only person on the planet. And yeah, sometimes that's nice and therapeutic, but there is something really beautiful about kind of connecting with people via art. So for me, this means I have a group that meets on Zoom once a week. It's a workshop group. This means that sometimes we bring our work, we give each other feedback. Sometimes we just sit around and we talk and we complain about our rejections, or we talk about, our imposter syndrome, or we just talk about our daily lives. Just having the ability to connect with other people, creative or not, is a huge thing, and you are going to find inspiration when you meet these people, when you talk with these people. I can't even tell you how many characters I've developed that have little bits and pieces of the people I have interacted with, and it has made me all the better for it. Something else you can do is mining the mundane. When I say this, as I said earlier, my day job is a bartender. I only work about 30 hours a week. I'm a firm believer in not working more than that if I can financially make that work, because I don't do well with the 40-hour work week. And something that was happening to me was this summer, it was tourist season. I work in a hotel. It was very busy. I was exhausted. I didn't have time to write, and I was getting so angry, and I felt very almost dried up inside. I was like, how do I make this work? How do people with full-time jobs do this? I guess I'm very privileged that I've never had to do this before. I don't know how to make art when I am so physically and emotionally burnt out. And then I realized, well, if I'm going to be at my day job, and I really love what I do, in my own time, which will hopefully be my career someday, I love to write, maybe I can find a way to do both at the same time. So I'm currently working on a strange series of essays that involve what it's like to be a female bartender, because that in itself is a very strange experience. And I've made me realize that, there's a famous saying in poetry, it's write what you know. I guess not just poetry, most writing kind of brings that idea in, like we can transcend this block if we just write what we're familiar with. And it sounds like it's so easy, but it's not. But when you realize that you go to these places and you can mine them for creative fodder, suddenly things change. I have a little notepad with me or my phone. My barback's in the audience, she can attest to this. I'll sit there and I'll make little notes, like if someone says something, or maybe someone has a strange job occupation, and I'm like, that's cool. I think I want a character that's going to be some kind of mineshaft engineer. Jot it down on paper. That person might never know that they're going to be part of a story I tell later, but that truth has somehow made it into my life, and I'm going to do something with it. So if you're at a day job, find a way. Obviously, maybe you don't have time to sit and write. Maybe you don't have time to do everything, but you can at least find 5 or 10 seconds to jot down an idea on paper, in your phone, somewhere. And chances are there might be something in that mundane that you find really beautiful, that really kind of brings you to life, and you know it in a way that no one else does because you spend so much time there. Something else you can do is research. That sounds very academic, doesn't it? However, research does not have to be boring. In fact, if research is boring, you're not doing it right. I'm a big fan of podcasts. In case you can't tell by my wandering and somewhat fast speech, I have ADHD. I don't do too well when I read to research. It's like they say when you hear something and it goes in one ear and out the other. That's how reading feels for me sometimes, which is pretty ironic considering the fact that I am choosing to read and write for, my lifeblood. But with research, I found there are other ways that I can research. And for me, that means listening to podcasts. It means going down weird internet rabbit holes for 4 hours and not feeling bad about it. It means watching a lot of documentaries. It means doing things that feel like research, kind of maybe hands-on. So, for instance, my thesis project that is currently a manuscript I am trying to sell, it is a novella in Flash, which means it is written in stories that are 1,000 words or under. And it is all about a weatherman who is trying to deliver the weather and live his daily life amidst a world that's being destroyed by climate change. Writing an end-of-the-world novel during the pandemic was a strange experience, but that's a whole nother talk. The research for that, what really I was trying to read online. I was trying to, I took this weird, free online class in, amateur meteorology, and I felt really out of my element, but it was fun. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to get a little journal, and I'm going to go start watching cloud formations. So I got really weird and, into cloud formations for a while, and I, would go outside, and I'd be like, it's a cumulus cloud, and, make my little notes, and, it was exciting, and you can probably tell I'm excited by how I talk about it. But, finding ways to research or find inspiration just kind of by indulging that childlike curiosity, going after the things that make you excited, even if they feel weird and unrelated. If you love it and you are excited, it will find a way into what you're doing. Research can also mean reading. As I said, reading can be hard for me. Something I found that works is reading stuff that's shorter. So I write short things, I read short things. Research, for me, sometimes means reading, but oftentimes it means going out into the world and doing strange things. And the last thing on here is play. And I want to emphasize play, because this is probably the thing that gets beat out of us the soonest as creatives. I'm sure if I ask any of you in this room, do you remember that moment that someone said something about your art not being good enough, or you not being good enough, or you can't make a living off of that? And it's soul-crushing, right? It hurts. I had people say that to me. I've had people say that I couldn't write, that I wasn't good at it. And it did hurt. But you know what really kind of got me excited again? It was playing. It was making art because I wanted to. I've been doing watercolors at home. I'm terrible at watercolors. I'm actually terrible. And my mother says, as an art teacher, she'll always say that no one is really bad at art. She hasn't seen my watercolors. But the thing is, it gives me joy, and it inspires me, and it makes me want to write and do things. Sometimes I'll watercolor, and I'll write poems on top or stories. Sometimes I'll write stories that I know are bad. I want to play. I, as a child, had a dollhouse, and I really liked small, tiny furniture. I've been looking at thrift stores because I'm like, I really want to make the house of one of my book characters just for fun. I just want to make his house. Why not? There's nothing to stop me from playing. There's no reason I should stop playing. So if you are finding yourself kind of lacking inspiration, these are a couple strategies you can use. Yeah, these won't guaranteed get you out of the hole, but they're probably going to be kind of helpful for you. Now, something else that is important to emphasize, because yes, all of these strategies are going to help you make more art, right? And as artists, we're always trying to make things like, I want to get my next book out, I want to get my next publication, I want to do something, right? But also, it's so important to remember that art is not really what we make. And that sounds, I know, very counterintuitive when we think about the fact that so much of our identity as artists is based off of kind of what we do. Even I stand up here and I say, oh, I'm an author, I'm a writer, I make XYZ. You see the final product, you don't see the process. Grad school was a really great experience for me. I would not have changed it. It really taught me a lot about myself, about my creative habits, and something that was a hard lesson for me to learn that I wish I had learned sooner, and I am emphasizing this to hopefully just shove it upon you so that you will never forget, is that process versus product is a concept that's really important to keep in mind. Art is not what we're making, art is who we are. My publications do not make me a writer. My book does not make me a writer. It is that insatiable excitement inside to tell stories and convey stories about other people. Like, that is what makes me an artist. This desire to tell stories and make things and to do it maybe for catharsis, but maybe for some other, external reason, that's what makes you an artist. You can make things all day long. That's not going to make you an artist. I know, it sounds crazy, I know, but it's true. So off to the side, I have a picture of a page from my little note-taking notebook. You might see some phrases and words here, and it doesn't really make sense, right? You see like torch, leather, I want to be warm, Patagonia, church in the woods, dictionary.com, word of the day. None of this makes sense, right? This is part of my process. Now, I could have showed you the final piece that came out of this, that eventually was published, but that doesn't feel right. Because yes, that is the art, but that's the product. And this is the process. And these pages of these weird notes I take that don't make sense to anybody but me, that is still really important. And that is still art. I mean, we can go through you watch a movie, right? And the hero's journey is such a famous arc. You see a character go on this big, beautiful adventure in this journey. If you started this movie at the beginning, just watch the beginning, and then you just watch the end, it's not going to be a very good movie, right? Things are probably not going to make sense. I mean, yeah, you can get the gist of it. But there's something about that journey and the ups and the downs that really are kind of it's what makes you feel something. It's what makes you really excited and connect to that story. So yeah, you're going to see some beautiful works of art and read some lovely books and watch some phenomenal movies. And you're not going to see the process there. You just see the final product. But that process makes the people behind that just as much of an artist as that final product does. I could spend the entire talk just on this slide because this is something I believe in so passionately, and it is so, so important to remember that it all goes back to the storytelling. I'm telling you a story, that's it. I'm just telling you a story. The story being done, that's exciting, yes, but the process of getting through it, that is huge and so important to remember. So you might feel creatively uninspired. You might not know what story you're telling or whose story or what you're doing, but it's all about the process. Sometimes I go through the process and I have no product. Actually, a lot. Since I graduated, I've actually been in this spot that I've spent a lot of time complaining about to my writer friends, my parents, my therapist, anyone who will listen to me, is that I can't write finished things. I love writing. It makes me warm in a way that nothing in this world does. And I'm trying so hard. I have so many stories to tell, and I don't know how to finish them. I'll get like a word or a sentence or a paragraph even. but I don't know how to end it. And it's like I'm word vomiting these little bits and pieces, and it's so frustrating because I'm like, ugh, damn it, I want a finished thing. Why can't I do the finished thing? What's wrong with me? Am I not a writer? Why can't I write? It's been months. I've been graduated for 5 months. I should be able to write finished things by now. But I keep remembering that it's about the process. And my process is kind of weird, and it's kind of messy, and sometimes it's consistent, and sometimes it's not. But that is not what makes me a writer. And kind of the more I think about that, the more that I give that energy and I give that truth, I don't know, it takes this weight off of you to know that you don't have to be making things all the time. You don't have to be engaging in capitalism and selling your art to be successful. Now, of course, that is lovely, and my goodness, we should all be paid for our art. That's also another talk. But it's just so important to remember this, and it's so easy to lose sight of when we live in a world where our art is going to be judged off of what is finished and polished and lovely. So kind of the gist of what I've been, word vomiting at you thus far is that as artists, we are not just telling these stories. We are creating stories. We are curating stories. We are delivering truth and life and beauty and pain, and one of my favorite quotes in the world is that somewhere in the world, somebody has a hole in their heart in the shape of your words. It gives me chills. I can't even say it without chills. And yes, that's true for words, but it's also true for your photographs, for the buildings you design, for the floral arrangements you make, for the commercials you do, whatever your creative outlet or endeavor is. You are creating a story, you are curating it, you are telling it, you are doing something remarkable that only you can do. We know that these stories are going to live in unexpected places. Those unexpected places might be in the mundane, it might be in other people, it might be through research and wandering out in the world. Who knows? And like I said, there's inspiration in about 1 million places that I did not even mention. When going through this, you might have in your head thought of some other place you like to kind of go to be inspired. You might have a physical space you go to. You might have a person you talk to. All of those things kind of show us inspiration is there. We can't make it, but we can get better at finding it. And sometimes we might not feel inspired, and that's okay. All we can do is keep trying. And again, we are not defined by our creative frequency. We are not going to be defined by job titles, by accolades. These are all things that are really nice for our career. They kind of maybe help us feel less like an imposter because, let's be honest, I think we all feel like an imposter sometimes. But at the end of the day, it's kind of a relief to know, like, wow, I could never write something ever again, and I would still be a writer because that is a core component of who I am in my soul. Now, I don't think I could never write again. I think I'd lose my mind. But it is very much like a lifting burden, right? It feels good to know that we can do these things and we can accomplish things because we want to, but we don't have to be worth it. We don't have to have our story be published in the New York Times or go viral on the internet for it to matter. So, I know maybe you're feeling inspired and excited, or maybe you're like, Hannah, you're forgetting something that's very real. It's called obstacles that happen in real life. Like I said. And these little quote bubbles, that yellow's not easy to read, sorry. These are some things that, yes, I've heard. These are also things that I have said. The first one is, I don't have the time or the energy. I don't have the inspiration. Or, I don't have the resources, aka, I don't have the money. How many times, raise your hand if you have said or felt something along the lines of these things. Now, some people might sit up here and say these are excuses. If you try hard enough, you can overcome these things. I'm going to politely say that if you feel that way, that's fine, but honestly, sometimes there are things that are very hard to overcome. There are places we can go to find resources. If you are really into trying to get your work into the world, there's a great website called Submittable. I highly recommend it. They do a lot of publications for literary journals, but they also do things like they do grants, they do research funding, there's conferences, there's all kinds of stuff there. Some of it you do have to pay to use, and that's very frustrating. But a lot of the stuff is free. So that's kind of a resource you can look at. There are resources out there that can help you kind of mitigate these obstacles, even if we cannot fully get them out of the way, especially things like finances. Not having the time or the energy. This is a very real problem. Something else that I think has really happened with the pandemic is we're slowly realizing that, first off, as it keeps coming up, the 40-hour work week is sometimes not sustainable or feasible for a lot of us. We're also finding that we have burnout. We spend a lot of time on Zoom screens. We don't like the sound of the Zoom. We spend too much time there. Sometimes you're like, I don't have the time or the energy to do things. How do I find that? How do I make that happen? I talked a little bit about the inspiration already, so you should know how to handle that. I can't give you energy. I can't manufacture time for you, but I'm hoping I can find ways that maybe I can help you sneak a little bit of time in there or borrow some energy from another place. But at the bottom of this, I want you to notice it is in small words and it should be in big. It is okay. We adjust. We keep trying. It is okay to feel like you are limited by your resources, by your time, by your job, by your mental health, by XYZ, whatever you have going on, whatever people, things you have to take care of. Those things can get in the way, and that's okay. You can't get everything out of the way, but you can kind of pick your battles. There are many great presses I would love to submit my book to. Most of them require anywhere between $15 and $30 for each reading fee. That seems pretty easy, right? Unless you consider the fact that sending a book out takes a long time. My first book, my poetry collection, I think I sent it to 12 different presses before it got taken by Finishing Line Press, based out of Kentucky. It's a small indie press. I had a great experience with them, lots of creative control. I think I spent $150 trying to get my book into the world before it happened. My royalty rate, full disclosure, is maybe about 12.5% of the sales for my book, which means that I've maybe broke even, probably not profited much. I'm clearly not in this for the money. I'm in this because I love it. All that being said, you know, we have to adjust, we keep trying. The money thing, that's not ideal. We're gonna do what we can, but that might be an obstacle. Maybe you look at free contests. Maybe you're more selective about submissions. Maybe you look at grants. Maybe you work your ass off and you try as hard as you can, and maybe you still can't get it out there. That's okay. It happens. We adjust and we keep trying. As you said, heard me say, I've published over 40 times. I've also been rejected almost 300. My dream journal, I sent to 7 times before they took anything. They didn't even, I got what's called a form rejection, which is like the template of like, thanks but no thanks. It was really polite. But it's still, it doesn't feel good, right? But we keep trying. The advice I always give my creative writing students when I teach is collect rejections like Pokemon cards. You gotta catch them all. You make a list of the journals you wanna be in, go get a rejection, seek out rejection. There's a great TED Talk, and my God, I wish I knew who it was by, but it is all about like seeking out failure and how when you seek out failure, suddenly failing is the expectation. It's not scary anymore. I send my poetry to the New Yorker every now and then. Am I gonna get published in the New Yorker? It would be amazing, but probably not. Probably not anytime soon, at least. Someday, yeah, I will. But in the meantime, I go out there and I'm like, yeah, it's not gonna work. I'm gonna send it. I'm just gonna do it anyways. Because the second you self-reject, you're out. If I didn't believe in my book and I didn't send it to this press because I didn't think it was good enough, it would have never gotten published. One of my favorite pieces that I still have not gotten picked up somewhere or published has been rejected 52 times. Now I could change my story and maybe it would be wiser if I did, but I don't want to, and it doesn't feel right to me. So I'm gonna keep trying. I'm gonna adjust by looking at new venues. I'm gonna adjust. I'm gonna keep trying. All you can do is just continue trying to tell your story, make your art. Again, we cannot get rid of obstacles, but we can minimize them. And you might be saying, okay, maybe my obstacle is not finances, maybe it's not the time or the energy, like, maybe my obstacle is me, question mark? How many of you feel like creatively you can be your own worst enemy? I'm asking you questions that I get to raise my hand for too. So, as you heard me say, I have ADHD. I was not diagnosed till I was 21. I spent a lot of my childhood, my upbringing, being a daydreamer. I was really bad about not paying attention in class. I talked too much and too fast. I remember being horribly anxious as a kid because I could never remember my homework. I always did it, and I was sharp, and I was bright, and I honestly was good at school, but I had to work so hard. I couldn't remember things, and eventually I just couldn't keep up, and it was overwhelming. And I got diagnosed and medicated, and it changed my life. That's not the case for everybody, but something that's been really nice through the process of learning how my ADHD can be something that is a good thing. Because, as I say in the bottom right, your adversities can be your advantages. Yeah, I have really poor executive function. It'll take me like 5 days to answer an email. It could be 2 days, but then I feel weird and shameful, so I like keep not answering it. And you all know how it goes. You've done it. I know you have. But something that's nice is, yeah, I've got bad executive function, but I'm really, really good at paying attention to weird things in the world around me. I might be bad at answering emails on time, but I'm really, really, really good at getting excited about weird passion projects and hyper-focusing on things that shouldn't matter, but to me they do. I spent so long feeling like ADHD and all of these other things were the worst because I can't keep a routine, I can't do this, I want to be that writer who writes every day and I just can't do it until I realized, like, maybe that's my strength. Maybe I can't write every day, but I can get excited and I can plan and think, and then when I do write, it's going to feel so, so good. And it's going to mean something, and it's not going to feel quite as much like pulling teeth. If you are a daily creative, kudos to you. There's nothing wrong with your process either. We just all have different ones. So, as I said, we have obstacles. We can't get them out of the way, but maybe we can make them a little bit less of an obstacle. They can be less obstructive. So to do this, we need to consider a couple things. We need to consider our approach. This might be your creative process. I'm someone who, my D&D alignment is chaotic good. This is also probably my writing process. Sometimes good, mostly chaotic. I want to write every day, but I can't, as I said. So for me, my process or my approach means having a routine that is a little more sporadic. So I have 3 days a week where I'll block off time, and I'm going to write. I don't say what I'm going to write. Maybe I don't write. Maybe I just do research. I just say I'm going to do something related or like to my writing in some capacity during this time. That way, because I know part of my approach is I don't do well with routines. Okay, well, I can't adjust me. I mean, I can, and I'll try. But also, I could adjust my routine, so it's not as much of a routine. It's called a workaround. I'm going to trick my brain into doing it this way because it's easier for me. ADHD is like finding workarounds for everything. The one I always say is I'm really good at like losing socks, so most of my socks are the exact same color. So if one goes missing, I just pair it with another one. It's a workaround. It's easy. It's something that works for me. It makes it easier for me to do what I need to do, which is put my socks on in the morning. Creatively, we all operate differently. Some of us are going to make stuff every day and feel really good about it and be excited. Some of us are going to word vomit 20 pages and then do nothing for like 2 months. That's okay. We just have to know kind of what our approach is and see how we can adjust it. We have to look at our obstacle. So for me, my obstacle is often myself. It is often having a weird work schedule where sometimes I'm done at 5 p.m. and sometimes I'm done at 1 a.m. And my sleep schedule is just anarchy at this point. That can be hard for me to be consistent, right? So that's an obstacle. How have I found ways to overcome that? I've looked at my approach, I've adjusted. I can't write every day. I put times that I can. 3 days a week. It's not the same 3 days. I don't even plan it. Each time I do it, I have a little bullet journal, I color my little square. Because for me, I need things to be a game. I need it to be fun, or else I lose attention, and I can't choose, what to do with that attention. So I need to do what I can to keep it there. You have what's called your expected result. And this was a phrasing that I played around with so much when I made this slide, because expected result might be, let's say for me, my expected result is a finished book. Your expected result might be something like a future goal. You might say, I want to be a professor. I want to have this job. I want to get this promotion. This is this thing that I want. This is this result that I expect to get someday, even with this obstacle, because of my approach. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to change my approach to minimize this obstacle or perhaps partially move around it so that I can get to this result. You just have to adjust accordingly. And I know that sounds very, very basic and I keep saying it, but you just have to adjust. I mean, again, we're telling stories. We got to figure out how we can do it. At the end of the day, it's fun. It should be fun. We want to keep it fun as much as we can. Even when it sucks, it should still be kind of fun. So you'll notice my little pages off to the side here. I talk about, your adversities also being your advantages. I love making lists. For someone who's really unorganized, I love making lists. And I think it's a self-indulgent thing, it's a curiosity thing, it's a mining the mundane world around me thing. Something I'm really guilty of doing is using the same words all the time when I write. So I always want to switch up my vocabulary. Okay, my expected result is having a more diverse word choice. The obstacle is me not knowing what to do. My approach, well, that's a good place to adjust. So I have this very long running list where I will look up the word of the day at different places. Or if I just hear someone say a word and I think it's lovely, I'll write it down. I'll write down the definition of that word, and then sometimes I'll number them and I'll play a game where I'm like, oh, I don't know what word to use. I'm gonna roll a dice. Oh, I got a 3. I'm gonna roll again. Oh, a 6. Okay, well, word number 3 is, harbor. Word number 6 is shovel. I'm gonna use these 2 things and write. I make it a game. I make it fun. My inability to completely focus and give things proper attention actually serves me well, because then I get to kind of itch this part of my brain that needs it with this strange creative indulgence of making these lists, doing things in a way that works for me. Innovation is really just creative problem solving. All these workarounds I've just told you about, these are all things that we're doing because there's something in the way and we have to figure out how to fix it. How many good ideas, projects, how many things are born out of the avoidance of something else, or because you're trying to figure out how to do something else and you accidentally do something on the side? Sometimes we call this procrastinating. It's like, I need to write this thing, but my brain wants to write these 5 other things. And that can be frustrating until I remember that I can always come back to that thing. I have these 5 exciting other things. So off to the side, you'll see I also have this little, you see Act 2. You see these little squares. You're not entirely sure what's going on. It seems very strange. I had a story I wanted to write. I still haven't fully wrote it. I've written part of it. And I didn't know how I wanted to plan it. I was trying to make an outline. It didn't work, and I was like, I want it to be fun. I'm going to make it fun. So I made this little 3.5, 2.5 paneled kind of graphic in my notebook, in my bullet journal. It's about a female magician and how one of the first amazing magic tricks that actually came to be was putting a woman into a box and making her disappear. It felt very symbolic to me. It was something I obsessed over, and I still, obviously, as I said, want to finish writing it, but haven't been able to. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to make this fun graphic. I'm not going to write it like a normal story. I'm going to do this in a way that feels like it's playing, that feels like it's fun, and I'll come back later, and I will tell that story in another way. But for now, this is the story that I've told. I feel good about this. It's fun. This is a process. It's not a product. This is not a finished piece. This is just something messy from my journal, and it doesn't really make sense, but it was worthwhile. I learned something from it. I told part of a story, even if it wasn't the whole thing. I did some kind of problem solving. Small steps are still better than none. A great quote I've also seen is, they say if you're just, the Couch to 5K program, if you're just starting to walk and jog and you are slow as a snail, maybe you're moving heel toe, you are still moving faster than the person that's still sitting on their couch. So at the end of the day, we are artists, we have obstacles, we have stories. We're just telling stories. There's going to be stuff in the way, and we're going to do our best to kind of push through that, but it might get kind of tough. We might not know how to overcome these obstacles, but there's always something that we can do to at least make it a little more enjoyable and accessible. But now I want to do some things. I want you all to stand up. You probably should hold on to whatever you're writing with, phone, paper, otherwise. How many of you hate talking to strangers? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I want you to walk up to someone in this room that you don't know, and I want you to learn something about them that is perhaps strange. I'm going to give you maybe a minute or two. I want you to go walk up to someone, and I want you to learn something about this person. Anything. Go meander. You can meander to me, but that's not as fun. Hello. Who wants to tell me a fact they just learned about someone in this room? You can say who this person is if you'd like. You don't have to, but what is a strange fact? Yeah. What color's their favorite? So, We learned that red is someone's favorite color. Hey, yeah, we laugh. That's still a good thing to learn. There's a lot of red in this room. Maybe in the future, when, I'm just going to say it's Nick because I know her, maybe she decides that she's going to do some kind of project, she's going to write something. Maybe she's going to use red, and she wouldn't have used red if she hadn't talked to that person. Who else learned something about someone in this room? Yeah. Ooh, you're hands-on people. You like to take objects apart and do fun, unexpected things with them. Well, you might have just found someone you want to collaborate with sometime, which is exciting. Maybe you go forth and maybe, if you don't mind me asking, what's kind of your creative outlet? I mean, would you consider this your creative outlet, this kind of hands-on innovation? You're into everything? Okay. Well, it's examples, like maybe you then take this knowledge, maybe you're a painter and you're like, I'm gonna take this thing apart and I'm gonna paint it. And I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't thought so much about this process of taking this thing apart and realized how beautiful and artistic it was. You know how many of my poems mention like Chardonnay and martinis, and like I talk about different kinds of drinks because I work in a bar. It's kind of just, it happens, I'm around it all the time, you know, I pick up on it, it becomes something that is part of a story I'm telling. This was just an example of the connecting with others. We talk with people, we have these things that we can then use. Look around this room. It's a theater, it's a beautiful space, right? If I wanted to mine this space for inspiration, maybe I write a story where everything takes place on a stage. Maybe I look at the symbols up here and I write a story where each chapter has to do with this symbol, and that symbol is going to mean something new after I'm done telling the story because I have created the story behind these symbols. Maybe I'm just going to describe the lights and I'm going to have these lights in a character's bedroom. Who knows? This entire space is ripe with things that you can take for your own creative use. You could paint something here. You could get a color that you decide, maybe the red. Maybe we want to make everything red, not just because of who we spoke to, but what we were around. We kind of absorbed that. It's exciting. We're telling stories, that's it. It's fun. It's always fun. Even when it sucks, it's fun. So I hope that this was meaningful to you. I hope you feel somewhat inspired or not bored at least. And I'm glad you humored me and went around and talked to people and considered storytelling. So we have a few minutes left. Any questions or things to wrap up? Yes. To help me overcome imposter syndrome. Ooh. I think this is a good time when connecting helps. I went to a science writing conference in Santa Fe a few years ago, and I was in a room full of people with PhDs who like studied. One was like, I work in the chimp lab at, I think it was like Yale or one of those, you know, very, very lofty schools. And I was like, oh my gosh, I do not belong here. This is like a bunch of scientists with PhDs, and I'm just an MFA student. And I remember I said I was a writer, and they were like, oh, that's so cool. I was like, what? You think it's cool? I think you're cool. Like, it was this feeling, and someone talked about imposter syndrome, and hearing these people who are at the top of their field talk about imposter syndrome was just so relieving. It's like, oh my gosh, it's not just me. I can be as accomplished. I can be the most accomplished person in the world, and I'm still going to feel like I don't know what I'm doing. So connecting with others, I think, is a really good exercise. And then I think also kind of taking time to yourself to maybe journal those feelings and be honest about them. I mean, let's be real, you might not have imposter syndrome, but the majority of people experience it in some way. Being able to acknowledge that and then come back to this idea of process versus product is kind of a really good way to kind of combat that, to remind yourself that even when you're not making things, your brain is creatively thinking, you're looking at the world around you as an artist. The artist part never really gets turned off. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Keith, and everyone at Revolve for putting this together. And thanks for kicking off the day with me. I'm excited to see the rest of these wonderful talks.